All right. Welcome, everybody. Let's start with who we are. We are Eaters. We're a group of architects, engineers, industry professionals that we develop software for the EC. We basically, our main expertise is to automate and streamline and connect every stage of the design process, either with startups or architects or engineers. And here we are to speak about interoperability in technology products and the best practices to create your own API. So to get started, a few icebreakers. How long would you think that you will last in a zombie apocalypse? Let's try how this works on a poll. Okay. I'm just a little bit sad that I cannot vote, but excited to see. Not even, I guess myself would say not even an hour. I was born in the middle of a city, and I feel I don't have the body or the skills to survive more than that. So not even an hour. Oh, most people think they're feeling lucky. Interesting. Okay, so nice, it works. Our agenda today is we're going to cover from what's an API, why interoperability it's important, what the role of an API, when to create it, how to create an API, document it, best practices, and then we're going to review a couple of the existing APIs in the industry and get conclusions out of it. And finally, a couple of nice tips and tricks when dealing with APIs. So just a brief introduction, what an API is. An API is basically an exchange of information between two different parts. In this case, it's going to be between your software and a third party. So I really love the analogy of when you go to a restaurant, the waiter is going to be your API. So you're going to order certain food. This is going to be the order to the API. Then the waiter is going to go to the kitchen. It's going to tell the chef, you know what, this guy wants stuffed chicken with mashed potatoes. And it's going to bring the chicken and the mashed potatoes in response. So that's an exchange of you give something and you get something in return. That's pretty much what an API is. So API is what allows interoperability between your platform and third parties. As simple as that. So why interoperability is important? None of these platforms would even exist without APIs. Apple and its iPhone would be nothing without all the different applications that you can create there. And all the same goes for Android. And all these applications are created because they have an API. Apple, it's a complicated API, and there are a lot of rules, but an API anyway. The same goes with Twitter. Most people don't know this, but Twitter API is one of the most used APIs in the world. It's used to get a lot of data from users, not only like explicit stuff like what people think about a politician or what people think about Kim Kardashian, but it also is used for more complex stuff like urbanism and how to design cities based on the feelings of what people is tweeting in different spots. So it gets really complicated. And the same goes with Windows. Computational products would not be the same without the Windows API, like not even AutoCAD, Revit, or any of the AEC products would be the same without Windows API. So imagine the world, how it would be different if we didn't have these kind of solutions. And this, of course, applies to the AEC. This is a really old illustration about the AEC ecosystem with all the different platforms. But it would be impossible if you cannot send information from one platform to the other. Nowadays, I know it's not the ideal world, and there's still a lot of like exchanges to fix between different platforms, but still, all these solutions have an API, and all these solutions have a broad ecosystem of different tools that can be created for Revit, AutoCAD, Dynamo, Grasshopper, Rhino, you name it. And the problem is so much worse than 10 years ago when this illustration was created, because nowadays we have so many startups and so many people working on new products that interoperability, it's a key. And this is something that happens every day, everywhere on our industry. Everybody is speaking about formats. Everybody is discussing, should we all use IFC as an open format that we can use, or should it be Revit, or should it be AutoCAD, or should it just be something like GLTF that you can use online? And it's true, formats are important, but it doesn't matter if you have an API that cannot read that specific format. We need to start thinking about the importance of the APIs and not so much on the formats. If an API is created correctly, you can make it flexible enough so any developer can come and then adapt it to a format, but not the other way around. You can have the format, but you don't have the API. A developer cannot come and create an API for your solution. So I feel that we need to start discussing more about APIs and not so much on formats. Please, if someone loves IFC, don't kill me. So what's the role of an API in your product? And this is a really important concept. Most people think of an API of a feature. Like, I have a product and someday I'm going to create an API for people out there. But it's completely opposite to that. An API can be the most streamlined choice that can help you scale your business and increase your ROI. It is amazing how many companies have based this on the importance of an API and have great results. First of all, it can get you more users. If you have an API, you can allow developers, external developers, to create solutions that allows you to interconnect with people who uses different formats, or people who are doing different workflows, or like, it allows you to get more users, and that translates into more revenue. It can enhance functionalities like Revit or any other software. If a developer comes and creates something on top of your solution, now you have many more features on your solution, so your product is much more powerful. So that translates also into more users or more loyal users, and also helps you build a community. It is amazing when you have a community of developers and a community of users asking these developers, third-party developers, creating stuff on top of your software. How that's a bond that it's special, because you're creating something and you take it as is your own, and that translates into a community. And sometimes it can even be your core business. So these are good examples, like Stripe. It's an API. It's the business itself, it's an API. The same goes with Autodesk Forge, now named Autodesk Platform Services. Sorry, I didn't update the name. Hopefully no one from Autodesk is part of the people attending this webinar, but Forge is the same. Forge is an API. The business, the core business, it's an API. So this can be extremely important. The same goes with Mapbox. Like the API, in many cases, turns out to be your main business. So imagine how important it is to do it properly and have one. So let's say you have a product and you're asking the questions, when should I create my own API? And typically, everybody thinks what I already said is I created my product, I want to do my POC, I want to do my MVP, or even if I already have my product, I just want to do features that my clients are requesting, but I don't care about the API. The API is going to come later, like, and it turns out it's the opposite. We at Ebers work a lot with startups, and the results these startups get when they do the API, first thing they do is the API. They don't do the product and then the API. They do the API and then the product. There is even a methodology called API first that you can follow on how to do this. And there are so many companies like Facebook, for example, that are following this methodology, and they're getting extremely good results, because I really love analogies, and it's like when you're trying to explain a complicated subject to someone, you need to make sure you know it perfectly, right? It's like I need to make sure, I need to be clear. And if I'm being clear, I can explain a complex subject to my grandma, I don't know, whatever. It means that I know it, and I'm the master of that subject. The same applies to APIs. If I'm able to provide a clear structure enough so anybody can connect and build on top of my product since the first day, it means my architecture, my product, it's well organized that anybody can use it. So it's that important when you do your API. So API first gives you a lot of benefits. First, best quality assurance. From day one, it needs to be robust enough so anybody can build stuff on top of it. Scalability. If you plan it in a way that you know in the future you're going to add more features and your API is going to grow as well as your product, it allows you to be more scalable. It also, from day one, allows you to create interoperability and integration with other programs. When you're in a sales pitch and you're going to want to try to sell your product, that's a great thing about it. Like if you already have an API, you might say, no, I don't have a connection between my product and the format you're using, but you can hire someone to customize it, or we can customize it for you, or we can find someone who customizes it for you. But it is so much better than the answer just saying, no, we cannot connect, we cannot use your format, call us in 6 months or 12 months. And then we know what happens in 6 or 10, 12 months, that client it's not a potential lead anymore. They're using a different software. So you lose clients by not having an API from day zero. Another proven thing when you implement API first, another benefit is faster time to market. It is proven with teams implement API first, they have a faster time to market. And then another really important, and me as a developer myself, I have experienced it. When you do API first, the developer experience is so much better because it's well thought and it's really integrated to the product. And since day zero, it's something structured and easy to use. So this translates into more features and translates into more users. So in the end, it's just everything are benefits for your product. So how to create your API? There are different tools and workflows and and platforms to do it. My favorite, one of my favorites, is the Open API initiative. It's a series of guidelines that help you think on how it's going to be the structure of the architecture of your API. And then there are tools like Postman that allows you to easily share either internally or externally your API. And this is something that sounds extremely simple, but a lot of like APIs out there are not compatible with Postman. Postman is a tool that you can quickly test an API or understand how you use it or document it or even test it. But most startups don't think about these details from day zero. They just do an API and then developers start complaining about it, and they have to adapt it and document it so they can use Postman, and it's a hurdle for both the developers who are trying to build stuff on top of your product as well as for you as the owner of the product, because you want to focus yourself on the product itself and your clients, not the API. But if you do it from day zero and considering interoperability and documentation like Postman, you save a lot of time for the future. And another option is Swagger as well. It's a great way of documenting the endpoints of your API so that anybody can test it and understand how it works. We're going to speak a lot about documentation later and seeing a couple of examples, but just wanted to give you a couple of options on when you create your API. So there are a couple of steps when you're starting to create your API. First one is identify the needs. What are the end goal of your API? If I'm Twitter, what's the end goal? It's to just provide endpoints for everything. This is going to be for user data. It's going to be for like relationship between data. Like you need to think about what it's going to be. Like Rabbit, for example. Like it is for people to build stuff on Rabbit, or is to create like their own programs that can connect to Rabbit. And that in that case, for example, when you're using Rabbit, you can build stuff on top of it, but you cannot do your own standalone product and connect to Rabbit, because Autodesk doesn't want that. They want it to be closed, and they want it to, like, hey, you want to build something with Rabbit, it has to be inside the Rabbit ecosystem. But these are decisions that you need to take. It can be good or bad decisions, but you need to take them from the beginning. Then make a plan. How many endpoints are you going to do? What is going to be the data structures? And it's important because I've seen APIs that are huge. I spoke with a client that they had a small product and they had more than 2,000 endpoints. And that's also a problem when you have to maintain such a scale of endpoints and an API. It's not good. So you need to make sure you have a balance between not too few, so you can allow your users to do whatever they want, your third-party developers to do whatever they want, but at the same time not so large there's going to be a problem to maintain in the future. And the same applies on the third step. When you design the architecture, it is important to design an architecture that is going to be flexible enough. So if in the future the product grows, make sure that we can make it scalable. We're going to give a couple of examples of existing APIs later on, and this is going to be much more clear. Then the API specification, how we're going to do it. These are like the blueprints of a construction, and then develop it. How I'm gonna program this, and finally document it, which is also really important. Which leads us to how to document your API, how to recreate it, and how to document it. I always feel that the documentation of an API has to be like these beautiful manuals of stuff that we can buy at Amazon. Like there's always a nice picture, warnings, an introduction, different sections, like instructions, parts. Like there is a huge detail that most of the times we don't read it. True, but if you need exactly something, you know you can go into these instructions and get it. And this is because it's a requirement. It's a legal requirement. With APIs, there is not such thing of legal requirements for the instructions of an API. And maybe in the future this is going to happen. Hopefully, we're going to have in the future legal requirements for APIs or ISOs or any type of certifications for APIs. Nowadays, there's not much out there, but it should look something like this. It should have at least a general overview of what the API does, a detailed description of all the endpoints and methods, examples, like clear examples on how to do it, and then like even errors messages that the user might encounter, like problems that they might find when they use the API. And how to do it, and how to do this, how to show the examples and how to engage and create a community. Well, I feel there are three different steps that you need to do as a baseline. First, create a blog. Create a blog where you show and you display how you use your own API. You have to do this constantly and provide examples all the time on how, or creative ways on how to do it. Get a champion. It is important that you can engage someone outside your company, and I feel it is important that it's outside your company that loves your product and that engage with your product since day zero and can post stuff about how to create things with solutions with your API. And then create a forum. Create a place that anybody can raise their hands and say, you know what, I don't know how to use this endpoint, or is this endpoint down, or I'm using this API, this endpoint, and I get this error. I don't know what to do with it. And it's important to be consistent and to provide a good service on the forum. It's not something that you just have there and you reply after a week, because if a developer is trying to use your API and cannot solve something, it might go with a different API or a different product. So timing is important. A good example is what Autodesk did. So they created a blog for platform services. They get a champion. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Jeremy Tamek. He's an amazing an experienced professional on Revit API and Forge API. Now he works at Autodesk. At the beginning, he didn't. And he's amazing on showing to the community the stuff that can be done with these APIs. He creates tools. He brings all the developers. He's a beacon in terms of how to use the API. And then create a forum. Autodesk forum, it's great. They have such a large structure that nowadays a lot of the answers are not even from Autodesk personnel, but they're all from people from the community. And this is really important. So let's dive into a couple of examples out there. This is just a comparative chart between different APIs of the industry, like the names. If it is cloud, desktop, the programming languages, which is also really important as well. If you're deciding to create an API, it needs to be something that it's easy for your users. Good example is Revit. Revit, it's written in C++, and the API it's in C#. A good documentation and that it's easy to use. That's really important. You can have a great documentation, but if it's not easy to use, nobody will use it. The first example, it's Revit. Revit, it's a really old API. The documentation is awful. It's extremely awful. It's not even cloud. You have to download it. and then it looks old, and even the introductions and the explanation of the different endpoints are really bad, and it's hard to understand what's happening. Luckily, they have a guy named Guy Talarico that he created a version, a cloud version. So not even Autodesk did it, but they have such a great community. One person took that awful like desktop API and uploaded online. So now it looks so much better. But still, they have a problem with the documentation, because now you can just go online and even compare, like we see on top, between different versions. And this is amazing also, like being able to compare between different versions and know if something is still existing from one version to the other or not, and even a search bar. But the problem is that even when you select any endpoint or any method of the API, this is hard to understand. Like, how I'm going to use this? Where are the errors? Or where are give me an example of how I can use this code. It's common that we all think that it doesn't matter. Software developer is going to read this and they will understand it. These are technical people. And that's so far from truth. Like, everything should be, you should be able to explain anything to your grandma. If your grandma understands it, everybody will understand it, or to a child. And the same applies to an API. If it is something so complex that you need to take time to understand it or try it, the same is going to happen to software developers as well. It's not that these are robots that they just come and by osmosis they understand what's happening. So that's the bad side about this API. But the good thing about the Revit API is that it is such a simple API in terms of there is endpoints for everything, and each endpoint, it's easy to use. It's straightforward to what you want to do. Like, I need to create an element in Revit. There is a element create endpoint, and you put the type of element and you just create it. That's it. It's just straightforward. So even when the documentation is bad, even when there are no examples, the endpoints and the amount of endpoints and the quality of these endpoints are really good. It was well thought, even when the API was not released at the same time that Revit was released, but still a really good API to use it. Another example is Autodesk Platform Services. They did a great job on the website. Like, it looks really good. It looks really clean. It is even divided by groups. If you have such a large API, it's always a good recommendation to split the endpoints between groups. Like, instead of having just one large chunk of endpoints like Revit did, like all together, it is a great idea to split it between groups. This allows for people to follow more on the content. They divide it into, depending on the use, like authentication, data visualization, design automation, and it helps a lot to the users. Another good thing is that they provide really good intros to what everything is doing. Like, hey, what's the overview of the API? What are the API basics? Like, hey, just try a couple of really small things to do. How to filter it, how, like, the main commands, and then after all that introduction, they provide you with all the endpoints of the API. But still they have grouped the groups into groups and small groups, so it's much more easier to understand and read. It's like a book. Like, you don't go straight to the book. You have a prologue, you have the intro to the book, like there are different, and even chapters of a book. You don't put all together. Like, you need order. And they did a great job here on the Autodesk Platform API. Even with each of the endpoints, and you can compare it to the Revit one, they have a lot of introduction. You have all the information on can you do, and I cannot scroll down here, but they even provide you different errors you can get. Like it is a great API. The downside of the Autodesk Platform Services API is the quality of the API itself. For example, when you want to upload something to BIM 360, a normal user will just drop it and file into BIM 360, and that will be it. When you're using the API and you have to upload a file to BIM 360, it's 6 endpoints. You have to send it to one endpoint, wait, get something off that endpoint, call another endpoint, wait, send something. Like, it is so awful. Like, I get it. They wanted to allow users to do anything they want, but they're making me do stuff that I don't care of, because most users, and that's something that you do all the time, upload stuff, download stuff, delete stuff. So you can do an automation to, like, I don't know, download something, do a process, and then upload it again. And that's the other thing about APIs. You need to make sure that even if the documentation is great, that you're doing stuff easy for your users. For us at Ibers, it's crazy because we a lot of us are software developers as well. And when software developers that come from different industries come into this API, this world of the AC, they ask us questions like, hey, what is this API? This is so hard to use. Like, I don't even understand it. So it is a problem also, that, and also the monetization. That is something that I'm not gonna get into detail, but if you're gonna monetize out of an API, make sure the monetization process is simple. With all of this, it's not something like you pay a fixed fee every month, but it's not something that you pay as you use, like Amazon. It is a mix in between that you have to pay tokens, and then they use the tokens for it. So it's complex. So make sure if you're gonna monetize your API, you do it in a super with your users. Otherwise it's going to be hard to use. The third example that I want to show you guys here is the Mapbox API. This is a great example of an API. Also, I love it, to be honest. And I guess it gets the best of both worlds in terms of like Revit, great API, really bad documentation. Autodesk Platform Services, great documentation, not so good API or monetization. Mapbox API, it's much more easier. Like the design of the web, it's clear. It has an overview. It has sections. Here are all the different groups of APIs they have. And then you can access each of them and get the different endpoints. And it's really good. The documentation is really good. How it works, it's also really good. Like using the Mapbox API is it's easy. It's really easy. Even if you're not an experienced software developer, it's really easy. And the monetization, it's also transparent for the user. Is you pay as you use, as simple as that. Finalizing, type tips and tricks for your API. Just make sure that you do what the user needs. Typically, when you're creating a product, you're thinking on your user, or you should think on your user. With the API, it's the same. The user is gonna be a mix between what the automations might be using your API or the extra features, and what your software developers need to use it. So make sure that if you're creating endpoints or if you're doing something, don't do like the example of the Autodesk API that you need so many endpoints to accomplish one thing. The opposite could be like doing too many endpoints, but just make sure that the design follows the needs of your users. Then don't make it complicated. It is important that when you're using your API, it's easy to use. It's clear and streamlined to go from point A to point B, like Stripe. What I'm going to use it? I'm going to use it to charge my clients, my potential users, a license. Okay, make it easy or give options to the developers. Like, hey, you want to embed something in your website? You want to do something? You want to take it outside because you don't want to, I don't know, use our forms to input your credit card? You want to do it? It doesn't matter, but you need to make it simple and you have to provide options. And then extremely important, you have to provide examples on how to use your API. And this needs to be clear examples. I've seen so many APIs that I'm not gonna consider myself a creative person, but even though when I see a couple of APIs, I don't even have a clue what to do with it. I love this Lego analogy on when they give you the pieces and they show you different stuff you can do with it. API is the same. What can I do with this kind of endpoints? Well, give me ideas. It doesn't need to be like extremely large products or customizations of your software, but give me ideas that I can then even mix your different solutions or the different examples you're providing to me, and then I can put together something. But it's necessary to provide all the time with ideas. This is what Lego does. They all the time use this strategy. They provide options, they release new products, and the pieces are the same. Remember, Lego's they add some new pieces, but they have been existing for decades, but they all the time provide new designs you can do with it. APIs is the same. You need to all the time provide new ways or ideas to your customers on how they can use the API. And you're gonna have great results when you do this. So as a conclusion of today's webinar, API interoperability, extremely important. You have to do it. It's the most important thing if you want to communicate in your ecosystem and as a business. APIs can be the most important part of your business or a really important part. So always have it in mind. Don't think about it as an extra feature only. API first is a must. If you're going to build an API, build it from day zero or as soon as possible. If you already started with your product, you better do it as soon as possible. The API architecture is the key, having in mind what the users want and structure it so it aligns on how your product works. An API without documentation doesn't work. Nobody will use it. It's impossible. And make sure you provide examples. And another thing, finally, it's get a community, get a champion, get people engaged to build stuff with your product. Even if you're not monetizing on these users doing customization, eventually you're going to be able to monetize on your community. Give it time. The community is really, really important. So that was it. Hope you like it. And now we are open for questions or comments you might have after this lovely presentation. Whoop. Okay, first question. we have been growing the users base of our product, which is great, but we're meeting some bumps in the way. These queries arise. How can we ensure that our API scales to meet the demands of a growing user base? That's a really good question. And the other one is, and how we can create a secure way to authenticate users. Okay, so a good way to make sure that the API meets the demand of a growing user base is like getting user feedback. Like you need to create your API based on the feedback of your users. This is the same as the front end of your business, which is your product, making sure that it is aligned with your product can do, and here what your users want to do with your product, but you cannot provide because you're focused on your core product, but not on your API. So a good one is making sure that's aligned with the feedback of your users, and how to create a secure way to authenticate your users. Like there are so many ways. Like I always suggest that at the beginning, if you're starting with a early product, you can use a third party like Auth0 or Cognito from Amazon. I feel those options are robust solutions that are secure enough for you through tokens or 2-leg token, 3-leg tokens, or different ways of authentication. But I suggest to going with that. And if you want to build your own authentication like infrastructure, I feel that you need to have a lot of experience with that, and make sure you have a really large project to be able to implement that. How can developers maintain their API to ensure that it continues to be interoperable with different technologies? Well, nowadays with cloud APIs, it's much more easier because as long as you allow to receive a schema of data that it's generic enough, like 3D data, like if the schema is going to be generic enough, they can put a middleman and translate from IFC into your schema. Or if the schema you're using it's IFC itself, you can just allow them to do the translation themselves on their side and then take it to your platform. That can be used to ensure that APIs are compatible with different kinds of technology. Well, I feel that being cloud is what changed everything. We need to understand how to measure our project success. What would you say are the key metrics for measuring the success for addressing interoperability issues? Well, people connecting to, if the problem is like interoperability issues, it means that how many times do you have clients that want to connect to your software but you cannot provide it? And it is not the same a client coming to you with a weird connection one time compared to someone just like all the time asking for a certain format. Like, I don't know, 10 clients a month asking for IFC. So it is worth, if that's the case, maybe it is worth for you to create the endpoint yourself. If it's just with customization, you can just introduce them to potential software developers, or allow endpoints to, like I said in the previous question, like enable them to adapt their format to the schema you have in your product, your API. So no more questions. Thanks very much to everybody that came to the webinar. And if you want to keep going the conversation, or you have any more questions or comments, you can just schedule a meeting with us or write us an email. So thanks very much. Hope to see you next time.